Good evening. It isn't the weather that makes me say it isn't a good evening. It's the fact that it's our final night of this closed class. And it would be a better evening if we had 2 or 3 more to follow. Been a particularly good class. You won't hear that said on many of the tapes. But it has been a fine class. It is a fine class. You will understand that better when you hear these tapes. And you will want to study them. And we are going to see also that all of England and South Africa and Australia and New Zealand, Canada and the United States also receives this class very quickly. It is important for 2 reasons. Not only that the consciousness of the class is high, but that the consciousness has brought out a message so compact. The principles of healing are on these tapes. So far as I know, in the Message of the Infinite Way, everything that can be taught on the subject of the letter of truth as applied to spiritual healing is on these tapes. I could say the same things in 100 different ways, but I could not add to what you have received in this class on the subject of treatment and of how to do spiritual healing work. Now, in this age, you hear a good deal about spiritual healing, but most of what you hear is not really in relation to spiritual healing at all. Spiritual healing is just a term that has been applied to every kind of healing that doesn't include materia medica. In other words, it has been made to cover faith healing, which has no relationship at all to spiritual healing. It has been made to cover evangelical healing, which in most cases has no relationship to spiritual healing. Even mental sciences, and lately even psychiatry and psychology have thought of themselves in terms of spiritual healing. Now, there is a way in which you can know when you are hearing about spiritual healing. And that is this. There are 2 points in spiritual healing which are almost exclusive to true spiritual healing. The first is this. In spiritual healing, you do not have 2 powers. You do not have a God that heals disease. You do not have a God that can be prayed to for some purpose, whether for physical, mental, moral, or financial healing. And when any healing takes the form of praying to God for it, it is no longer spiritual healing, it is faith healing or some form of orthodox healing, but not spiritual. True spiritual healing is based on the principle that God is infinite. Therefore, there can be no law, no cause, no reality to anything which does not show forth God's glory. Therefore, the very first step in spiritual healing is the understanding that you are not going to God for a healing, that which seems to require healing has no existence in God, has no existence by virtue of God, has no reality to it, and once you have made that clear in your mind, that you are not going to God for something, then you are prepared for the step which results in spiritual healing. And that is conscious realization of the presence of God. Consciousness of the presence of God. Conscious awareness of the presence of God. Now, once you have this inner feeling of God's presence, you have the absence of sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation. Not because God has done anything to them, but because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. In the presence of God, there can be no such thing as sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. I might sum it up this way also, that where there is spiritual power, there is no temporal power. Now, temporal power may include anything of a material or mental nature, but where the Spirit is, there is neither mental nor physical power. There is only the grace of God in operation. For this reason, you have it in the writings and in the recordings that we do not demonstrate health or wealth or employment or companionship. We have only one demonstration to make: the demonstration of the presence of God. Now, this is not just making the statement that God fills all space. That doesn't do it. There has to be the experience of God, the actual awareness or feel of the presence of God. You see, spiritual healing is not in the realm of the human mind. It is not an act of the mentality. In fact, the only part your mind plays in spiritual healing is that first part, when you are assuring yourself that there are not two powers. You don't need God to overcome some other power or destroy it for you. There is only one power, and that is God's power. That you declare with your mind, you think through your thoughts. But having done that, the next and the most important part is the actual experience of God, the actual awareness. And that is why we have given so many years and so much of the writings to the subject of meditation and practicing the presence of God. It is in our periods of practicing the presence of God that the mind becomes still enough to permit meditation. For instance, we call this contemplative meditation. Actually, it is also practicing the presence of God. When we accustom ourselves from waking up in the morning until retiring at night, and then sometimes in the middle of the night, when we accustom ourselves to practicing the presence of God or contemplating the nature of God, it is as if every appearance that came to us during the day or night of a material nature, we turn from and declare God's presence, God's power, God's allness, God's grace. We train ourselves so that when we read bad news or hear it on the radio or witness it on the street, that we instantly and instinctively turn within and realize that is the appearance, but God's grace is the truth. That is the appearance, but the presence of God is the power unto every situation. So it is that regardless of what we note in our home life, family life, community life, we inwardly, secretly, sacredly realize God is on the scene in spite of appearances. God is the law to this situation in spite of appearances. We do not make the mistake of voicing this. Voicing it antagonizes. The Master is very clear that when you pray, go into the sanctuary, go into your own inner being and pray in secret. The Father that seeth in secret will reward thee openly. Therefore, don't say to your friends and relatives who may be very little or not at all interested in the subject of truth, don't voice truth to them and arouse their antagonism. The Master was very clear about render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but inwardly, secretly, silently declare God, realize God, understand God in spite of all the appearances that are in the world, and more specifically to every situation that comes to your attention. Now then, that is practicing the presence of God, and it leads to the ability to sit back quietly, close the eyes and open the ears, and be receptive. It is almost as if you were creating a vacuum within yourself, but you do not make attempts to still the mind or to stop thought, for you'll never succeed with that. When you sit down for quiet meditation, if you do not instantly feel the silence within you, the stillness, then practice what we call contemplative meditation. Take some idea of God. 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 Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Thy grace is my sufficiency in all things. Thou art the only life of my being. Thou art the soul of my being. Thou art the law unto my being and unto my body. God's grace feeds, maintains, sustains. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Oh yes, God is the law of my being, the life of my being. And God's grace is where I am, in sickness or in health, in purity or in sin. God is ever present, and his forgiveness is always with me. 70 times 7, and again 70 times 7, and again 70 times 7. There is no end to his forgiveness, his grace, for he says, neither do I condemn thee. Son, thou art ever with me. All that I have is thine. And of course there are 1,000 other passages that you know. And even if you don't, when you sit in the silence, they will come to you from within your own being, and you'll feel quietness and peace. And then eventually you will completely run out of words and thoughts, and there'll be a second or 10 seconds or 60 seconds of a complete peace. And that's all. That is your meditation. That is your realization. Now, as you do that 3, 4, 5 times a day, the day eventually comes when in your meditation you actually hear that still small voice, or you are given an inner assurance, or you have the feel of God's presence, and then you know that you have arrived. Because that is your ultimate function, to be able to commune with God, to receive impartations within yourself from God, for always remember where God is, within you, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. You don't have to go anywhere to find God. You don't have to do anything to find God, except be still. For he is nearer to you than breathing, closer than hands and feet, and you bring him into your experience through the silence which you develop, the stillness which you develop. Now, spiritual healing then is, number one, recognize that there is only one power, not two. Recognize that God isn't going to destroy anything or remove anything or heal anything, but that God's presence realized is the dissolving of any erroneous pictures or beliefs that the so-called mortal mind or carnal mind may have presented to you. In most forms of mental and even religious healing, you will find that some appeal is made to God to do something to error. That is why we have the words God and devil, or God and Satan. That is why we have words like good and evil, denoting two powers. And you see, in metaphysics, many people have turned to the word immortal and thought of it as a power over the mortal. And thereby, again, they brought the two powers into metaphysics, whereas metaphysics was intended to reveal that the immortal is the true and the mortal is nothingness. Do you follow that? If you make the mistake of believing that immortal mind is going to destroy mortal mind, or that immortal truth is going to destroy mortal error, or that God is going to do battle with the carnal mind, you might just as well be back in old orthodoxy as pursuing a work of this kind, because you will not progress. Your progress in the message of the infinite way depends on what extent you can come to the realization that terms like mortal mind or carnal mind mean the sum total of nothingness, belief, superstition, appearance. Then you'll find healing to be a simple matter, because now there's nothing left but the realization of God, which causes the pictures which human sense has built to evaporate and disappear. Now, these are the principal points in spiritual healing. Always to keep uppermost in mind that you can take any form of error that appears, whether it's sin or disease or death or lack or limitation or false appetites or anything else, and just embrace it under the whole term carnal mind or mortal mind or appearance or hypnotism and then say, ah, yes, but not power. Ah, yes, but not power. That brings a smile to you. I have no power to get rid of, no power to overcome, no law of disease to do anything to, no power. Now you have nothing to do but find your stillness until that moment of release, peace, that spiritual healing. And then you find the symptoms begin to disappear. And as we've had said many times during this class, sometimes instantaneously, sometimes 7 years, that nobody can give us a written guarantee as to whether our particular claim is going to yield quickly or slowly. Because sometimes a claim will not yield until some human trait in us has been met and dissolved. You see, we have brought many of our ills into our experience through traits of character which we have developed. And they have externalized themselves as forms of discord. And it is only when, through our spiritual studies, that our nature changes. In other words, a person who cannot find it easy to forgive may have quite some difficulty with some particular healing until their inner nature changes and they really learn the meaning of love, that love isn't a word, love is an act. And love has to be shown forth in forgiveness, in understanding, in cooperation. Love is really the healer, but love isn't a word. Love is an actual experience which has to flow out from us, and sometimes in service, sometimes in gratitude. We have to often feel within ourselves such a depth of gratitude for God's love, for God's grace, for the life of sacrifice that has been made by the saints and the seers and the sages of all times to bring us this spiritual wisdom. Sometimes love has to just bubble up in us in the form of gratitude. Oh yes, criticism, condemnation, you can't imagine that this is fertile soil for the grace of God. And those of us who have grown up with a naturally critical state of thought or condemnatory, we have to learn to overcome these things and bring ourselves to a position shown forth by Christ Jesus. You know what the right attitude of life is, because you know what his words are and that his acts were in keeping with his words. We cannot go around talking about love and at the same time harboring resentments, hatreds, biases, bigotries, jealousies, envyings. It's an impossibility. That is not fertile soil for the activity of the grace of God. And so it is that very often healings do not take place until some yielding takes place within us and our nature changes. During class, there is an alert, listening attitude. Afterwards at home, the same clearness of perception as one sorts out and digests certain of the teachings given during the evening. Then normal sleep until 5:30, when comes the first desire to go on sleeping. This is thrown aside while about the work. The moments of quiet meditation during the day are alive, but afterwards, sleep. Is this the old sin of inertia? Please explain the sleep that is needed and how or when it becomes something to transcend. Now let us understand this very clearly. No one should try to avoid sleep. Agree with thine adversary. If you feel tired or if you feel that a period of sleep is necessary, give in to it and lie down and have your sleep. Then get up and do your work. It makes no difference when it is. There are times when I retire at 7 o'clock in the evening and then get up at 9 or 10 or 11. There are times when I don't retire till 1 in the morning and then I'm awake at 3 or 4 or 5. I don't fight sleep. If I feel the need of sleep, I will lie down and have it, and then get up and work. When you do that, you are not fighting anything. You are agreeing with your adversary, and you will find that as you progress in the work, you will require less and less sleep. But do not make a conscious effort to overcome sleep, because you will not succeed. And if you do, you will not help your health. When there is a need for being awake 16, 18, or 20 hours a day, the Spirit itself will see that you are able to do it without any injury to yourself. Whereas if you try to make the demonstration, you may succeed by willpower, but it will only be repression. You see, in our Hebraic days, that is, in the days when we were under the 10 Commandments, we had to learn repression. We had to learn to take each one of those 10 Commandments and specifically read them and then watch ourselves and be sure that we didn't violate them. And if we were tempted to violate, we had to consciously remember, oh no, I mustn't violate this commandment. And what we really did was repress. And of course, the result is that we have lots of prisons and lots of insane asylums. All testimony to the fact that when you repress, in the end it breaks out. Under grace, you do not have any thou shalt nots. Under grace, you let the Spirit of God govern you. And you will find that the Spirit of God so governs you that your only desires are along the line that is natural, right, beneficial, and good, not only for you, but for all those who touch your life. So that rather than sit down to meditate or treat when sleep is trying to get the best of you, have your sleep. And then wake up and be alert and awake and do your work. And gradually you'll find that by not fighting, you will come to the place where you will require less of sleep. In the Bible, we read of the still small voice of truth speaking to man. And Mrs. Eddy said the soul-inspired patriarchs heard the voice of truth and talked with God as consciously as man talks to man. In my experience, it has been an awareness, the voice of comfort, of rebuke, the bringing to thought verses of Scripture, some learned in childhood with new meanings. Talking to some truth students, one said that that was the subconscious mind repeating itself, but I cannot accept that. Can you enlighten us? First of all, I will say to the student who wrote this that you are indeed fortunate and that you are indeed in tune with the infinite, and that if you keep on and deepen these experiences, you can go very, very far on the spiritual path. Now, I would caution all students to pay no attention to what any other student tells them. I caution all students not to discuss truth with each other. Find your teacher. What you don't know or can't learn from the books, take up with your teacher, and don't let everybody else be your teacher, because in many cases you are better qualified, and certainly in this case, than those who would offer advice or teaching. Now, to begin with, statements like this, that the subconscious mind repeats itself, is the voice of atheism. That is what we learn from all atheists, that there is really no God. It's really only your own subconscious mind talking to you. Now, it would be far too long a thing to undertake to prove to you that it isn't the subconscious mind, but I can shorten it by saying this to you, that up to this moment, psychiatry and psychology both acknowledge that they have never had a cure of any disease. Therefore, there isn't any reason for us to accept them as authority. In one of the dominions, there is a committee right now investigating the subject for the government with a view of recommending that psychiatry and psychology be outlawed. Because having investigated thoroughly, they find that no claim is made by psychiatry or psychology of any healing of any disease. Think of that. And yet we have a tremendous literature telling us what it's all about. But of course acknowledging that they can't prove it because they haven't had a success. That isn't true of our work, and you know that. There is healing in the spiritual ministry, and there has been for 75 years. Good healing. Sufficiently good so that the Church of England, in its report on spiritual healing, acknowledges the part that Christian Science has played in awakening the Church to its responsibility. They wouldn't do that if they didn't know that spiritual healing has been successful. Now, nobody knows whether there is a subconscious mind at this moment. Nobody's ever found a subconscious mind. Nobody's located a subconscious mind. The term subconscious mind is one that is used to explain something that can't be explained. The action of the mind when it is not in its conscious functioning. But nobody knows actually what a subconscious mind is or where it is or how it functions. Be assured of this. By their fruits ye shall know them. Now, if all of these years this student has been receiving guidance and rightful rebuke and the voice of comfort and the bringing to thought of verses of Scripture, undoubtedly with signs following, what more proof can you have than that you are in touch with the Spirit or the presence of God? Of course, a rose by any other name is just as sweet. And if somebody would like to call God the subconscious mind, it still will not change the nature of God or your contact. But be assured of this. Spiritual wisdom comes from a depth that has nothing to do with man's mind. Spiritual power comes from the soul of man and not from the mind. Mind is a reasoning power. Mind is a reasoning faculty. Mind is a thinking faculty, but mind isn't a creative faculty. Only God is. And the Word of God. Nobody yet has ever decreed a thing with their mind and made it come true. But when the voice of God decrees it through your consciousness or your mind, when God says, rise, pick up your bed and walk, believe me, you rise, and promptly. But man, with his mind, can say to a simple headache, get going, and it won't. But when the voice of God speaks, cancers disappear, polio disappears, and all the other ills of the flesh disappear when the voice of God speaks. So be sure of this. Do not allow yourself in this age to be filled with psychology or psychiatry, because you would at best be dealing with a subject about which its own practitioners declare we have not yet healed a single disease. Don't forget that. You may read those very words in the report of the government of New Zealand. Is the life of dedication of which you spoke yesterday what Jesus means when he speaks of howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting after the transfiguration? And does he call us faithless and perverse generation, not long to be suffered, because we will not realize we have only ourselves to blame in bowing to outside authorities and accepting false ideas true? Yes, to both of those things. The life of dedication is the prayer, the fasting from material sense, from human wisdom, from the activity of the mind, conscious and unconscious and subconscious. When we are absent from the body and present with the Lord, when we are absent from human wisdom and all of its beliefs and theories, and present with that still small voice, that is the prayer and the fasting that the Master spoke of. And certainly this faithless and perverse generation is any generation that is bowing down to idols and worshiping them. When you give power to the golden calf or the golden dollar or the golden pound, when you are giving power to the things of this world, the pleasures and the pains, that is idolatry. When you begin your spiritual life, that is, when you begin to make the transition from faith in the external to faith and confidence and assurance in the invisible, you are then beginning the path of spiritual wisdom. Now, this does not mean that we are expected to make our complete demonstrations in 5 minutes. It doesn't mean that just because we are slow in attaining full Christhood, it does not mean that we are to be condemned or criticized or judged. Oh, no, no. Oh, no, I have heard it said from outside, oh, well, you people get sick sometimes, and Christian scientists get sick sometimes. Well, we haven't quite claimed our full Christhood. Paul says that even he is not claiming to have completely arrived. But forgetting those things which are past, looking toward the vision, we walk in that direction. Now, any one of us may slip and slide. Any one of us may have a backward step. Let's not indulge criticism, judgment, or condemnation. Let us rather value ourselves by our motives and by the degree of devotion that we are putting into this effort to attain Christhood. Don't judge your progress by where you are this minute. Don't judge your progress because you may go along beautifully for a year or two or 5 or 10 and then slip back. Don't judge yourself that way. Judge yourself only by your motives and your desires and your devotion, and understand this, that we are in a world of hypnotism. We are in a world where error is blared into us from the radio, from the television, from the newspaper headlines, from the fears of wars and the coming of wars. We are in as much fear today, we're in as much trouble today as a world as the Hebrews were 2,000 years ago in the Holy Lands, or as Europe was in the Middle Ages, when there were 30-year wars and 100-year wars and religious wars. This world is going through a very, very bad stage, and you are being filled with wars and rumors of wars, epidemics, incurable diseases, and not as they were in the past that nobody heard of them. Now, the very minute there's a rumor, there are newspaper headlines and radio headlines and television. You not only hear it, but you see it. You're brought right to the scene of action, and you witness the firing of the rifles and the murders and whatnots. And is it any wonder then that with all of the best intentions, that once in a while we should come under the spell of this hypnotic suggestion of a human world and human powers and fall back a step? When we do, let us first of all not indulge criticism of ourselves or others, but let us seek the help of those students who are at the moment free and can help us up, or if they are the ones who fall down, let us be quick in offering help to them. We have not yet attained the fullness of Christhood. And if there is anyone on earth who has, we don't know their identity. So far as we know, all of the masters that are on earth today are going through, at some time or other, one or another claim, either physical or mental or financial, probably not moral anymore, but the others. And when they do have those experiences, they are humble enough to turn to each other and ask for a lift. I know of nobody who is claiming to be beyond the need of an occasional bit of help from another spiritual student on the path. And so it is that we are on the way, but right now we need the help of each other. Now this next question is one that I love. Not for the question itself, but for the things that surround it. Can effective protective treatment be given for another? For example, in order to protect them from road accidents and so forth. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. The only thing that comes into question there is this, that as you know, it also requires some measure of receptivity. And the person who has closed their mind to spiritual help is not as apt to receive the protection, the benefit of your protective work, as those who make themselves subject unto the spiritual law. Now, here is what I would like to say. In our work in the infinite way, we have many avenues of activity, all of which have one purpose, and that is helping us to attain spiritual awareness, helping us to attain spiritual consciousness. Whether it is a closed class or a lecture, whether it is the writings or recordings, the monthly letter, the purpose of all of them is really to keep us in the spirit so that we may more easily meditate and make contact with our inner source. If I had to give up all of the infinite way activities but one, the one that I would keep is our monthly letter. That monthly letter is a precious, precious activity. And for this reason, it is to keep us with a fresh message every month, large enough message to last a whole month, but with specific principles for use and application in our daily experience. Now, every year since these letters began, 54, 55, 56, 57, and now 58, there are letters on this subject of protective work. And the subject of protective work is without doubt one of the most important in the entire Infinite Way activity. The reason is this. Every discordant human experience in our lives could be prevented if we consciously know the truth and keep ourselves clothed in spiritual armor. Now, what do we mean exactly by knowing the truth and keeping ourselves clothed in spiritual armor? Well, what is the great evil that gets us into trouble? The belief in two powers. That's what does it. It comes down to as simple a matter as that it is the belief, the universal belief, which we individually accept, the belief in two powers. There isn't one of us that would ever have a discord in this whole world if we could come to the full and complete realization of one power. Now, we are under the daily suggestions from this world by our families and by our newspapers and radios and televisions and all the rest of it. We are under the daily hypnotic suggestion of two powers. And to some extent, we respond. That response sets up in us, consciously or unconsciously, a fear. So that we fear accidents on the road, or we fear the result of alcohol, or we fear the wet weather, or we fear the germs that are going around, or we fear the polio season, or we fear the cancer propaganda. And in one way or another, we are played upon every day by this human scene with its fears, and certainly they're thrown at us. Now, the only way that we can be clothed with the armor of the Spirit is to consciously remember, starting out with the morning, that God is the only power in our experience, and that there is no power in effects, no power in weather, no power in germs, no power in heredity, no power in alcohol, no power in bad drivers, since God only is the power, and God is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Where I am, God is, and where God is, there is divine protection. Now, when I say that to you in this moment, this is a treatment. It is protective work. And if you are receptive to it, you can go out of here and rejoice in the fact that every step you take, God is taking with you. You are maintained and sustained. But you will not be away many minutes until this pressure comes in from the world. Oh, there's an accident over there, or here's a headline over here, and back again comes this human sense of fear or belief in two powers. And so again, you have to remind yourself This might go on at the beginning 20 times a day, that you are reminding yourself, remember, there's only one power. Do not fear what mortal man can do to me. Do not fear what mortal conditions can do to me. Do not fear what human belief is saying. Do not fear what human thought is doing. You have to remind yourself of that over and over and over and over until a day comes when, like a burst of light, you realize, oh, it's true, God is the only power. And then from there on, it's just an occasional reminder comes into you, and you smile when you hear these talks about two powers: germs, weather, climate, wars, bombs. Inwardly you smile, not outwardly, because you don't want to offend your neighbor who is still living in fear of two powers. Now, I ask our students, wherever they possibly can, to own this monthly letter, to subscribe for it, to receive it, to work faithfully with it, and then when they come out in book form, to own them, have them, refer to them, and then be sure that they know every word that's in those books on the subject of protective work. Because you are not protecting yourself from evil, you are protecting yourself from the belief in two powers. Do you understand that? If you were protecting yourself from evil, you'd be back in orthodoxy again. You'd be afraid of mortal mind or the carnal mind. Do you see that? But if you are protecting yourself spiritually, you are only protecting yourself from the universal belief in two powers. That must be very clear to you, or you will not progress spiritually. Spiritual progress is an awareness of God. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. In him there is no fear. Why? For there is nothing to fear. There are not two powers. Yes, there are two powers operating in the human world through belief. That's what is called being under the law of good and evil, the law of sin and purity, the law of health and disease, the law of life and death. But come out and be separate. Separate yourself from the universal belief in two powers. Now, you can do that in this minute, but you can't hold it forever. You can't hold it forever if you were in class every day. You consciously must do your own protective work, not once a day, 20 times a day. Every time a suggestion comes to you from any direction of two powers, you have to declare, but I'm living under God's grace where there is only one power. The next question. As there is only one power, God, what caused mankind in the first instance to think that there were two powers? Well, you know what the Bible says? The Bible says a woman came along and tempted us to eat an apple. Of course, that doesn't explain anything, does it? Not a thing. We don't know anything more about how the human mind set itself up with two powers than we actually know how to get rid of the belief of two powers. All we know is this: a divine revelation gave us this vision that revealed that there are not two powers, there is only one. And that we suffer from two, not because there are two, but because we've accepted a belief in two, and we have given that belief power over us. Now, you may have heard, and it's true, that some 60 or 75 years ago, people were advised not to eat tomatoes because they were poisonous food. And don't you know that a lot of people got poisoned eating them? But not from tomatoes, but because they had been made to accept that belief. Now, in my early days, I thought of being a doctor, and I took some pre-med work, and I learned about several diseases. And since then, the books tell us that was all wrong. But people suffered from them just the same. You see, you can be made to suffer from anything that you can be made to believe in. It makes no difference whether somebody can convince you that you shouldn't walk under a ladder or shouldn't be alive on Friday the 13th. It'd be much better to stay in bed. But we know that ignorance, superstition, fear, well, I could carry it further with you and tell you of the many sects there are in the world that believe that you can be killed through somebody else's wrong thinking. There are even modern teachings on how you can be made to suffer from malpractice by somebody else doing some wrong thinking about you. Now that all goes back to the old days when the Aborigines in Australia could kill by cursing you. And so if one of your friends or relatives thought it best to have you out of the way, they went to this man, and this man did what they call pointing. He used either a pointed stick or his finger. And the minute he pointed in your direction, you felt terribly sick, and the next day you died. Of course you did, because you've been brought up from infancy to believe he had that power. And so the minute you knew that your friend or relative went there to that man, you began to get trembly. And that's what happened. In Hawaii, we had what are called bad kahunas. We have good kahunas and bad. The good kahunas do healing work, spiritual healing. But the bad kahunas, you go to them and say, I'd like my friend to drop dead. And within 48 hours, he usually drops dead. Why? Because from infancy, they have been brought up to fear that bad kahuna. In Pennsylvania, we have a group called hexers. Same thing. You go to a hexer and say, I want this person killed, and they kill him. Now, you know right well that it does not take place because anybody has been empowered to kill. It means that if you have been brought up from childhood to fear this thing, it can come upon you. So it is. If you have been made to fear getting your feet wet or sitting in a draft, so forth and so on, you bring these things upon you. But it has been revealed to us in our work that God is infinite being, and God is spirit, and God is power, and therefore God is spiritual power. And that means only power. And nothing else is power. But we can only demonstrate that in the degree of our consciously bringing it into our minds morning, noon, and night until we've attained the realization there is but one power.